It's a three-senator day today on the Hugh Hewitt Show, so stay tuned for the whole thing. Senator Tim Scott, Republican, South Carolina. Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat, Connecticut. Senator Dave McCormick, Republican, Pennsylvania. That's a good lineup. And we throw in Representative Juan Ciscomani from Arizona and a bunch of great smart people like Danny Pletka of AEI, Sarah Bedford of the Washington Examiner. We got a great show for you. But it starts with President Trump holding his first cabinet meeting. Let's start with his message to the federal employees who did not respond to the OPM email asking for 5 things you did last week, cut number 3.
I'd like to add that those million people that haven't responded, though, Elon, they are on the bubble. You know, I wouldn't say that we're thrilled about it. You know, they haven't responded. Now, maybe they don't exist. Maybe we're paying people that don't exist. Don't forget, we just got here. This group just got here. But those people are on the bubble, as they say. You know, maybe they're going to be gone. Maybe they're not around. Maybe they have other jobs. Maybe they moved and they're not where they're supposed to be. A lot of things could have happened. I wouldn't say that Biden ran a very tight administration. They spent money like nobody's ever spent money before, wasted money. The Green New Scam, all of the different things they spent money on. And you've seen that. You've seen that with some of the things that I read in speeches. I read them and people can't believe when I read them. 20 million here, 30 million here for, you know, a little educational course on something, circumcision, right? Circumcision. $20 million to inform the people of such and such a country on other things and other things other than that. So, yeah, those people are, right now we're trying to find out who those people are that haven't responded. Now, there'll be some agencies, like Marco has people within state that are right now doing very classified, very confidential work, and we understand that. We've talked, and, you know, we're being a little more surgical. And Marco's doing a lot of things himself. He's and some of the secretaries are. We're going to be going to them. We're going to be talking about it today. We're going to ask them to do their own doge. In other words, they'll look in their group, and I spoke with Lee Zeldin, and he thinks he's going to be cutting 65% or so of the people from environmental. And we're going to speed up the process, too, at the same time. You had a lot of people that weren't doing their job. They were just obstructionists, and a lot of people that didn't exist, I guess, Lee, too. You found a lot of empty spots. The people weren't there. They didn't exist.
If I were them, I would go to work tomorrow, and I'd fill out the OPM form, because you work for that guy. That's who you work for. He's the head of the executive branch. You might think you work for the union. You might think you work for the Congress. You might think you work for your supervisor. No, you work for that guy, the president. That's your boss. So if the boss sends you an email through the HR department, you ought to respond, hey, I don't understand this, or I'm here, but I'm sick. I'll get back. You just respond because you work for him. The president went on to talk about the border. Cut number 4.
But we also having tremendous support from Border Patrol, from ICE. The ICE agents have been unbelievable. Border Patrol, their leadership at Border Patrol has been incredible, and they're working very well. And as you know, and I saw you reporting it this morning, actually, we set records on the least number of illegal aliens coming in, migrants coming into our country that we've had in more than 50 years. And we did this all within a period of weeks because we took over a mess. The world was pouring in. And remember, they were coming in from jails and prisons and mental institutions and insane asylums, and they were gang members and drug dealers. Anybody wanted to come in, they came. And from not just South America, from all over the world. So it's amazing what they've done. And Christie and Tom Holman, the job they've done has been absolutely amazing. We set records for and we want people to come into our country, by the way, but they want to come in, they have to come in legally. I want that to be really understood. We want people in our country, but they have to come in legally.
Good for him. Now, he went on to talk about the fact yesterday the House of Representatives passed the budget. That's a big deal. I'll talk about that with Senator Scott, with Senator Murphy, with Senator McCormick. That means reconciliation is unlocked. That means any bill that affects the budget that is based on that budget, assuming that the Senate does what the Senate should do and just pass the bill, then reconciliation is open. It only takes 50 votes. There are 53 Republicans. We're going to get the tax cuts extended. We're going to get defense built up. We're going to get the border. We're going to get energy going. Lots of stuff is going to happen. But you know what's not going to happen? Listen to the president. Cut number 2.
The spending bill that passed last night aims to cut $2 trillion.
Right.
Can you guarantee that Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security will not be touched?
Yeah, I mean, I have said it so many times, you shouldn't be asking me that question. Okay? This will not be read my lips. It won't be read my lips anymore. We're not going to touch it. Now, we are going to look for fraud. I'm sure you're okay with that, like people that shouldn't be on, people that are illegal aliens and others, criminals in many cases. And that's with Social Security. We have a lot of people. You see that immediately when you see people that are 200 years old that are being sent checks for Social Security. Some of them are actually being sent checks. So we're tracing that down, and I have a feeling that Pam is going to do a very good job with that. But you have a lot of fraud. But no, I'm not. We're not doing anything on this.
I actually don't think anyone who's 200 years old is getting a check. I believe that there's a lot of fraud in Medicare, but I think that little bit of information put out by Elon was wrong. I believe that bit of information was actually the number of people who had been issued Social Security numbers in that age bracket. And therefore, it was not accurate, and the president ought not to use it. But generally, we are going to find a lot of fraud. Now, because a lot of people who work in this country who are not in the country legally buy false Social Security numbers of deceased people on their way to getting fake documents. Cut number 1, the president talks about NATO and Ukraine.
Our equipment, that would have been over very quickly.
What concessions would you like to see? What concessions would you like to see?
Oh, I don't want to tell right now, but I can tell you that NATO you can forget about. I think that's probably the reason the whole thing started. And I think, JD, we can say that. Do you have a statement on that? You've been very much involved. I gave him the beauty.
Great. Gave me the hardest question, sir. I mean, look, as the president said, we're not going to do the negotiation in public with the American media. He's going to do it in private with the president of Russia, with the president of Ukraine, and with other leaders. And I think that's how this has to go. I think that.
Good for JD. Vice President actually knows, no, we're not going to tell you that. That's not for you to know. And by the way, why are you asking? It's not in the interest of the United States. Cut number 5, Donald Trump.
We want to balance a budget. We want to have a balanced budget within a reasonably short period of time, meaning maybe by next year or the year after, but maybe even sooner than that.
One bit of audio I love today comes from Secretary of the Interior Doug Burgum. Cut number 10.
Well, Maria, President Trump understood that this is a big issue for attracting, aggregating capital and putting it to work and building stuff in America. And that's why he created the National Energy Dominance Council by executive order just over 10 days ago. And in that, he's assembled on that council is about half the cabinet. And so Biden used a whole of government approach to try to shut down U.S. energy. So on that, we've got Lee Zeldin from EPA, Chris Wright from Department of Energy, Howard Lutnick from Commerce. We've got Sean Duffy from Transportation, who's working to reduce all of these onerous Cap A standards on transportation. Brooke Rollins from Agriculture, she's got all the biofuels. All of these fellow cabinet members are all part of this the Dominance Council, and together it's going to take all of us to unwind the incredible burden that the Biden administration put on American energy producers, and not just oil and gas, but the people that produce electricity in this country, which is so essential.
Now, what do the markets think about that? Market report brought to you by AmericanFederal.com. Our good friend Nick Grovich over at American Federal, 800-221-7694. John Campbell, thank you for sitting in for me yesterday, John. I told you about Nick Grovich. I'm going to tell you right now, if you're going to buy gold or silver, do it with Nick. 1-800-221-7694. 1-800-221-7694. John's going to do that with Nick. The markets are all down today. The Dow, the S&P, the Nasdaq markets aren't closed yet. Gold's up a little bit, but not much, down from last week, up on the day, and markets are waiting. Markets are waiting on a lot of different things. Tariffs, taxes, energy production, markets are waiting. I'll talk a little bit later about how long it takes for actual metrics on President Trump's performance to come up. But right now, I love that performance in front of the cabinet today. And if you want to love some gold and silver, call Nick Grovich and his team at 1-800-221-7694 or visit AmericanFederal.com. That's AmericanFederal.com. I'm joined now by Danny Pletka. Danny is, of course, at AEI, where she brings a bright smile to my mouth every time we see her. Danny, I was listening to What the Hell is Going On podcast, and it didn't answer for me the number one question. What the hell is going on in Israel right now?
Whew, that's an excellent question. Look, I think that we are in a limbo between what is called phase 1 and phase 2 of the ceasefire plan between Hamas and the state of Israel. They are negotiating a quote-unquote phase 2 in Qatar, that great sponsor of terrorism, but they haven't gotten to it yet. So what we're looking at probably now is the release of a few more dead bodies this weekend, and not clear what next.
Okay, let's start for a moment on Qatar. I met with their ambassador and a number of people, and I heard 1,000 different times. They only do what we ask them to do vis-a-vis Hamas. And if we tell them to cut off Hamas, they will cut off Hamas. Is that your understanding?
No, that's not true at all. Look, the leadership of Hamas lives in Doha. The money that they've stolen from international donors that was destined for the Palestinian people is in Qatari banks. They're not the only terrorists who live in Doha. In addition, where did the Taliban live before Joe Biden gave them back Afghanistan? Yep, they lived in Qatar. Who else lives there? We see folks from ISIS, from the Muslim Brotherhood, every terrorist group known to man. And of course, Al Jazeera, which is their state-owned television station, is constantly propagandizing anti-Semitism, Islamist extremism. The idea that the Qataris are only doing what we ask is nothing other than propaganda.
All right, so what should we do with our base that is there?
First of all, I have talked to senior military people, including former commanders of CENTCOM. They tell me that base is completely impractical. The reason that we have it there is because, although many people don't understand this, we are for rent. The Qataris pay for the base, and it is a huge expense. We understand why it's desirable, but in terms of the necessary depth that would be needed, for example, if we were to get into a conflict with Iran, in terms of the requirements that we might have for defending either our interests or our allies in the region, that base is inadequate and insecure. We should move.
All right, now, moving on to the next step. You just mentioned Iran. When Israel settles the ledger with Hamas, and I believe that's coming as surely as day follows night, should we also help them settle the ledger with Iran?
You know, you're asking a great question. I have known Prime Minister Netanyahu for, 40 years, I think. We're not close personal friends. He doesn't call me up and ask me, Danny, when should I bomb Iran? But I will tell you, every time I thought that he was prime minister and he was going to move, he hasn't. And I don't quite understand what his thinking is. I know there's a lot of pressure inside the Israeli military to move forward because Iran has never been this weak, not since the revolution, and they won't be this weak again. And so now is the right moment. But perhaps they're waiting on the hostages. And perhaps they're not going to do this. I didn't understand.
Well, the front page of the Wall Street Journal today says they have enough nuclear material for 6 nuclear weapons. That's new.
So they have been very close to a nuclear weapon for quite a long time. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which has been crowded out of Iran for quite a while, has suggested that they will have a nuclear weapon almost at a time of their choosing. I think for the Israelis, The issue here is the Iranians now have not got the necessary air defenses. The problem that I can't answer for you, Hugh, and I would love it if you ask somebody who's smarter than me on this question, is that people suggest that the Israeli military doesn't have the tools, the military tools necessary to penetrate Iran's nuclear sites and actually do the kind of devastating damage that's necessary.
Now, I've heard Jonathan
might,
Schanzer at FDD say that after they crippled the air defenses, they have a path right over Syria, right into the heart of Tehran, into every one, and that we gave them 2,000-pound bombs, but it would be better if we went along.
Look, I think the problem for us is that we have to ask ourselves, does Donald Trump want to go along? And, you know, there are two Donald Trumps in this regard. There's the one who is a stalwart friend to Israel, who recognizes the danger to us and to our allies of a nuclear Iran, recognizes they might proliferate those nuclear weapons to others, as they have with everything else they've gotten. And then there's the other Donald Trump who's sort of like, you know, oh, we can't be getting into any more of these wars. And I don't know which one makes this decision.
That's not a war. That's a day trip.
Great line. You know, look, it is, except there will be people who are unhappy and who will seek to target us as a result.
Who will be unhappy, Danny? We have a minute. I mean, really, who would be unhappy that isn't already unhappy with us?
Okay, so first of all, let's talk about the fact that, well, no, isn't already unhappy with us. That everybody's already unhappy with us in that neck of the woods. But if we are not talking about deposing the Iranian regime, they have a lot of proxies. They have worked previously, not just with Hezbollah, with Hamas, with the Houthis, with the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq. They've also worked with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So, you know, we could look at some real risks for ourselves.
Okay, good caution. Good analysis as always. Listen to What the Hell is Going On with Danny Pletka and Mark Thiessen. Every time it drops, it's a great podcast. Thank you, Danny. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina joins me. Hello, Senator. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Hugh, good to be back with you. I hope you're doing fantastic.
I am, and I hope the same for you. You are, however, the
Thank
chairman
you.
of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. I've always wondered about people who take that job on, Senator. It's kind of a nightmare, isn't it?
It is indeed a very difficult task, especially in the 2026 cycle. One of the reasons why I took it is I believe it gives me a chance to make a positive impact on this nation's future. I believe 4 years in the majority, Hugh, is long enough to have generational change. So the NRSC job gives me an opportunity to recruit candidates, raise money, and make sure America's future is absolutely impacted by the Trump 4 years. I think we could have the kind of pro-market positive change that will make America great for a generation, not just for 4 years.
Senator, the last time I saw you and talked to you, I was sitting across from you on the debate stage. How did that campaign go? What'd you make of the debates?
You know, my campaign, Faith in America, really was, in fact, what I felt called to do, which was have a positive message. When we knew the American people wanted a bull in the China shop, it gave me an opportunity to understand the American people better. What I left with was this notion that America has never been at the precipice of change as we were then. And frankly, what we've seen in the first couple of months of the presidency is that change that I knew we were hungry for. I left it more optimistic, frankly, more humbled, and more hungry for the change that people need every single day.
Now, I've done debates in 2016 and 2024, Senator. I've come to the conclusion the Republicans should never let legacy media near them again. What do you think?
Amen. Well, Hugh, listen, one of the things that we see every single time we let the liberal media dictate our debates, it turns out to be a colossal failure. Thank God you were one of the moderators. The fact of the matter is we should have 3 moderators who are all conservative and objective and ask us the tough questions. The fact of the matter is the liberal media wants to trap us, not so that we expose to the American people our positions on policies, but that they expose the chaos that comes from their own hearts, their own objectives. That is not in the best interest of the American people. The one thing I can say about you, Hugh, is you're intelligent, you're engaging, and you're intellectually curious. And having a conversation with you in a debate forum is a little intimidating, but in the end, it informs the American people about why we stand where we stand, what we will do, and how that's in their best interest. That's all you can really ask.
Well, I'm not looking for flattery, but I did ask 3 questions about China and they're the only three questions anyone ever asked about China. I learned later from your colleague, Senator Cotton, whose book's over my shoulder, that every network except Fox is owned by a studio that worries about China. I didn't know that.
You can tell by the debate, that's without any question. We should all be concerned about the existential threat that is China, economically and from a military perspective. There's no doubt that a country that lies, cheats, and steals our intellectual property is stealing a part of the future. Reining that in is incredibly important. That's one of the things I'm doing as the chairman of the banking committee, frankly. I know I chair the NRSC, but as chairman of the banking committee, I'm looking to make sure that we slow down, if not stop, certain products and technologies going to China. It's not in our best interest. And frankly, it's not in the world's best interest. The weaker they get, the better it is for the world.
I want to come back to the banking committee in a moment. Senator Murphy's coming up, by the way, next hour. But I want to ask you about the NRSC. As I look at the map, Senator Collins and Senator Tillis of Maine and North Carolina,
yes,
friends of mine, they're going to have targets on their back. They're both great candidates. Senator Ossoff of Georgia is weak, and there are open seats in Minnesota and Michigan. How goes the recruitment in those three Democrat-held seats?
Yeah, we're doing pretty good. I've talked to a number of candidates in those three states specifically. Number one, I'll say this: in Georgia, there's no question that the star of the show would be Brian Kemp. I think, according to the last poll, he has a 13-point lead against Ossoff. Number two, we're going to find the best candidate who wants to run. If Brian decides not to do so, we're already talking to other candidates in the state. The good news is John Ossoff is not representing the people of Georgia. They know it, he knows it, and frankly, we know it. So we believe we're in a positive position to see change come to Georgia. Number two, Michigan. Mike Rogers lost that state by 0.3%. I believe that our recruitment efforts there will manifest in a positive candidate who will win that state. Number three, I look at Minnesota, a state where President Trump ended up about 46% of the vote. She won with 50% of the vote, even with the vice presidential candidate being the governor of the state. That means opportunity springs eternal in Minnesota.
The House passed a budget last night. Senate's passed a budget. What's going to happen?
Well, we're going to get it done for the American people. The bottom line is simply this: whether it's one beautiful bill or not, what the American people can count on, the promises that we heard on the campaign trail, will be the promises that we keep as legislators. That means securing the southern border will be accomplished, and people can say yes and amen. Number two, it means that we are going to increase our energy resources. That means prices will come down, inflation will fall, interest rates will follow. That's really wonderful news. And number three, we're going to take the bargaining chip of our military off the chessboard. That is necessary. And number four, we are going to extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and avoid the Democrats raising taxes by $4+ trillion. All that translates into more security across the country, more money in the pockets, lower prices at the pumps, and a military that is lethal and ready to take on the challenges across the globe.
Last question, Senator. Senator Murphy's coming up. I'm sure he's a friend of yours. You get along with everyone in the Senate. I'm not a prophet, nor the son of a prophet, but I guess he's going to say Republicans plan on cutting Medicaid. How should I respond to that?
Yeah. Well, the answer is simply this: President Trump is already committed not touching Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Anyone who suggests that we are going to change Medicaid and cut it is telling you, and they know it, something other than the truth.
I will quote you right back at him. Senator Tim Scott, thank you for joining me for a little extra bonus bit, and I appreciate your joining me anytime during the cycle, Senator. Just give a call.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you, Hugh. See you soon.
Let me remind everyone, you're missing Dennis Prager. I hear from you every day. Don't forget Pragertopia.
Today's subject comes with a trigger warning. What is the trigger warning? That you are about to hear what will be labeled at every college in America as sexist, which means that it is probably true, and it is a painful truth of life, and therefore the left is offended by it.
I miss Dennis, too. I was asked about him yesterday by a bunch of friends of mine. I said, I expect Dennis will be back sooner than you expect. Now, Pragertopia is out there for those of you who miss Dennis too much. It's classic. He did a lot of evergreen radio, meaning you could play it forever. And we do. And some of it's recent, some of it's vintage, all of it's at Pragertopia. Got to join to enjoy it. Let me also remind everyone, I should ask Senator Scott about this. Big Pharma is haunting the halls of Congress. They saw that budget pass yesterday. I'm not sure they're happy about that, because the faster the budget moves, the less time for Big Pharma to lobby it. Big Pharma raised prices on drugs, more than 500 drugs in January. They would like to lock in competitive market advantages wherever they can. Big Pharma is not my friend in D.C. It's my friend at the drugstore. It's my friend when I get a prescription. It's the friend of everyone who needs to get a prescription. They do great things. They do great work. I've never said other than that. My brother worked for Big Pharma, but he's a scientist, not a lobbyist, for Mycroft, my oldest brother. He's the smart guy. And my other older brother is a smart guy, too, but he's not Mycroft smart. Mycroft is the scientist. And Mycroft worked for Big Pharma for years developing drugs. I got a lot of respect for Big Pharma, but I don't like their lobbyists. Their lobbyists can never say, oh, that's enough, and push away from the table. They've all got gout. I really do. I think they've all got gout. Well, they don't need any more gout. Help the pharma lobbyists avoid gout. Head to pharmawindfall.com and stop the attempt to loot about $30 billion out of the healthcare system. I tried to explain the healthcare system this week to my law students, the fact that we've got 5 different systems plus the emergency room system, so it's really 6 different systems. Big Pharma works them all. Stop the pharma windfall. Go to pharmawindfall.com. Hey, Generalissimo, myphdweightloss.com, 864-644-1900. Did you cover that with John Campbell yesterday?
Yes, he actually he said the last time I saw you in studio, you were fat. Is how he started
well, that's
the spot.
not very nice.
Well, but that's John Campbell. That's how the spot started yesterday.
Well, that's just not very nice.
And he said, I'm here to tell you, you're not as fat as you were.
That's again not very nice.
Well, I understand that, but he's our friend.
I guess that is true.
Yes.
Yeah, 864-644-1900. Now, he's a little stick of a man who get blown away in the wind, so he doesn't need my PhDweightloss.com.
Yes, he needs a post to hang on to.
Yeah, he actually needs to go to the gym.
Yes.
You know where the fetching Mr. Hewitt runs into him?
In the kale aisle at the grocery store?
No, at the Pilates class.
Oh, I see. That would go. That would stand to figure,
Did you get his
wouldn't
man card yesterday?
No, I did not.
You could have picked up his man card yesterday.
We didn't do Pilates talk. No.
I'm surprised. He's always talking about his Pilates to me. Look how nimble I am, and he's like Mr. Gumby.
Nimble? You just seen him try to get behind that desk.
Well, I didn't say coordinated. I said nimble.
Gotcha.
My PhD weight loss. Dwayne lost 50 pounds, kept it off.
864-644-1900.
That's
864-644-1900.
Coming up next hour, Chris Murphy. And Chris Murphy has been on before. I have some Democrats who come on regularly. I got Ro Khanna. I got Chris Coons. I got Chris Murphy. Ro, Chris, and Chris. Angus King isn't a Democrat. He's an independent, but Angus comes on as well. I like Democrats. Democrats are always welcome here. But did you notice I applied to be the new editorial page editor at the Washington Post today?
Wasn't that just grand?
Well, David Shipley was a friend of mine, and although we ended up disagreeing and I left the Post, it wasn't because of David, but David didn't like what the owner wanted. So the owner didn't fire him, he just decided to leave.
The hardest hit people now at the Washington Post editorial board are those that are against personal
We're not going to talk about the Washington Post editorial board. My rule is never to talk about former employers. I am going to say that I just posted online. I will be glad to return to the Washington Post opinion section as the editor. I'd be happy to do that. I could make that thing sing and get subscriptions up dramatically. I'd sign a 3-month contract. I'd say, let's play for performance. All right? I want to be paid per new subscription.
That's kind of how free markets work.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone else will. I will be willing to work on a pay for performance basis, Jeff. So all of you out there, if I vanish suddenly and start broadcasting from the Beltway again, because I took on a new job of saving the Washington Post from itself. I mentioned earlier in the show, and I just want to take 3 minutes to tell you, as you get older, it's more difficult to find real friends. You make them easily in grade school and high school and college. Maybe the greatest friends of my life I made in college, my roommates, and a couple from high school, actually a half dozen from high school. And then as you get older, you find it's more difficult because family, obligations. You meet some people at church, you meet some people in work, you run with some people, you exercise with some people, you go to ball games, you become work friends with some people. It's harder to find friends as you get older. Well, I moved to Maine 3 summers ago and spent almost all of the last summer and the summer before that in Maine. And I was really blessed, as was the fetching Mrs. Hewitt, to become friends with JJ and Brian. Younger than we are, longtime Mainers. They're from Massachusetts, high school sweethearts. I mean, just peas in a pod. Wonderful daughters, wonderful grandchildren. And Brian and JJ may be the nicest people I've met in the last 25 years. And yesterday, my wife got a note that Brian had to have open heart surgery down in Florida. And they go away. Few people stay in Maine during the winter. Okay, we said prayers for him, and Betsy sent a text off to JJ. And Betsy herself had to have some stuff done yesterday. And I was off, thank you, John Campbell. And this morning I wake up and my wife is sobbing because Brian died. And I mean, I was just shaken because he's a saint. He's in heaven. He's having champagne with David Allen White because Brian is the guy with the big red truck, meaning whatever you needed done, and he knew I was a landlubber. So, for example, put my boat in, take my boat out. I don't know how to do a boat. You ever try and see me back up a boat? I'd take the house and the ramp with me. I'd take the neighboring boats with me. Brian would do that. He'd come over and fix anything that needed fixing at my brother-in-law's house, anybody's house. I think basically there was a sign in front of his house, "I will help you." That was Brian. Even when my grandchildren came to town, Brian said, "Have them come over. I'll teach them how to plant potatoes and I'll teach them how to make using sharp objects." He's like Schroeder, only he has 10 fingers. Schroeder lost another digit this week. So Brian was like Schroeder North. And I mean, for a guy, he's in heaven. That doesn't make it easier on JJ, his daughters, or his wonderful grandkids, those boys who would go up and down the river with him. Say a prayer for Brian, JJ, and their family, because it's the kind of thing that you leave every room, everyone you're leaving for a period of time certain, just make sure you say thank you. It's a pleasure knowing you, because it was a pleasure and a great grace to know Brian. I always love it when a Democrat shows up. The list of Democrats who like to come by is relatively short. Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, Ro Khanna from California. Angus King is Democrat adjacent. My senator from Maine, Chris Coons from Delaware. And my guest, Chris Murphy, senator from Connecticut, joins me, a member of the House for 6 years, a member of the Senate for 12. Senator, welcome back. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me. I want you to get a couple of swings in first. What'd you make of the House budget that passed last night?
Yeah, I think it'll represent the most massive transfer of wealth and resources from the middle class and the poor to the wealthy, perhaps in the history of the country. 8 years ago, when they did the big tax cut, for most of that money went to the very wealthy and the corporations. It was all borrowed, right? So we just racked up in the end at least $2 trillion on our credit card. The economy didn't grow like they promised, and so it just got added onto the national debt. This time around, the debt will grow because $3 trillion of this is going to be borrowed, but over $1 trillion will come from cuts to programs that do matter to regular people. 24% of Americans are insured by Medicaid, working Americans, kids. That's how we pay for 2/3 of the nursing home beds in this country. And they're going to do $880 billion, somewhere around that, of cuts to Medicaid. There's no way for that to happen without a lot of people losing their insurance in a lot of red states. Hospitals closing, addiction treatment centers closing. And I just don't know why that's worth it if the bulk of the savings is going to go to people who are already very, very wealthy. I know they're going to have some tax cuts in here that will, help middle class folks, but the lion's share of the benefit will go to the very, very wealthy, financed by Medicaid cuts, which I just think is like not what people thought was going to happen when they elected Donald Trump. I don't remember him promising to gut the Medicaid program, and I think people are going to be, in for a pretty rude awakening when their rural hospital closes and they didn't get a tax cut that was anywhere close to the size of the tax cut that the CEOs got.
So, Senator, the American Rescue Plan of 2021, which passed via reconciliation, ran a deficit of $1.9 trillion. The second big Biden swing, the Inflation Reduction Act, cost $1 trillion over 10 years, $2 to $4 trillion over 25 years. So it looks to me like the House budget, I'm not sure it's the final, but the House budget actually uses deficit spending less than the two budgets that the Democrats passed when they had the reconciliation process. Why is that not apples to apples?
Well, for a very important reason. You're conflating two bills that are not similar. So the Inflation Reduction Act was fully paid for. It, in fact, reduced the deficit. You are right that the stimulus bill, the first bill, that was passed on the heels of other deficit-funded COVID relief bills, was deficit financed, just like all the COVID relief bills that Donald Trump passed were deficit financed. But after that first COVID relief bill that Biden passed, that next big swing, the Inflation Reduction Act, included, whether people like it or not, offsets, reductions in spending under Medicare, increases in personal and corporate tax liability that more than offset the payments. So, yeah, it's just not apples to apples because the Inflation Reduction Act was offset, was paid for, and actually reduced the deficit.
Okay, it's an interview, not a debate, but I'll send the audience. They can go look up the Inflation Reduction cost, the Inflation Reduction Act cost. Couple of questions. Do you want to tax?
Well, you're right about the cost. I mean, the cost is high. The cost is high, but there's two. Those are two different conversations. The cost is big. The question is what the impact on the deficit is, and the cost it can be big, but as long as you have offsets, meaning either corresponding spending cuts or tax increases, the impact on the deficit is different than the overall.
And my research, and I can be wrong, frequently wrong, never in doubt on the radio and the television. My research said that the Inflation Reduction Act resulted in a deficit of $1 trillion over 10 years and $2 to $4 trillion over 25. But let's leave it to the audience to find out. I want to ask you, do you want to tax overtime, Senator?
Oh, listen, I'm willing to do anything that is, good for working people out there, whether it's reducing tax liability for overtime or their underlying wages. Ultimately, though, if you're working overtime and you pay a little bit less in taxes, but you lose your health insurance, that's not a good trade. And that's the trade that the Republicans are asking for. In many of these red states, they have Medicaid expansion programs that disappear, literally just disappear the minute that the match falls below 90%. There's no way to get $880 billion of Medicaid cuts without that match falling below 90%. So, ultimately, every family has a budget. And if they pay a little bit less in taxes on a handful of overtime hours, but they lose their health care, that's not a trade that they want.
Okay, the House budget also would eliminate the tax on tips. Do you want to tax tips?
That's a little bit more complicated question, right? There are a lot of people in this country that make their wages based on tips. And the question is, do you want an economy in which, folks don't pay taxes on tips, but pay taxes on salary or hourly income? Does that mean that ultimately a lot of work sort of gets shifted away from regular wages and into tips? I'm up for the conversation on how to do it, but I don't think that that's an easy one. There are going to be a lot of people in my state who will say, well, wait a second, I don't make my money on tips. I just go to work every day and, get paid $15 an hour. I got to pay, full taxes on that. But somebody that makes the majority of their wages in tips pays less taxes. That doesn't sound fair to me. So I'm up for the conversation. That one is just a lot more complicated when it comes to creating a fair tax structure.
But the House budget does both eliminate taxes on tips and taxes on overtime. You don't like the budget. I wonder if you want to keep those provisions or jettison them.
Well, just to be clear, it doesn't do either of those things. I mean, there's this claim that the House budget reduces or eliminates taxes on overtime and taxes on tips. It absolutely doesn't. Like, there's nothing in that budget document that they passed last night that says anything about eliminating taxes on overtime or taxes on tips. So, like, they may want to do that in the future, but that's actually nowhere in the budget they passed last night.
That goes to the Ways and Means Committee. I know how reconciliation works. I'm just assuming you do as well. That will be part of the Ways and Means reconciliation of the budget with their Oversight Committee. But if in fact they eliminate taxes on tips and overtime, are you going to vote up or down on that?
But how do you know? I mean,
because it's
you're
been
asking
promised.
me how I'm going to vote. You're saying how I'm going to vote. Well, no. If that bill is paid for by removing health insurance from millions of Americans, that's a terrible deal for Americans. I'm just telling you, there's no appetite in this country to have taxes on overtime pay reduced in exchange for your health care being taken away, your rural hospital being closed, and your mom being kicked out of the nursing home. Like, that's not a good deal for people. So if that's how that bill is structured, and it also raises the deficit, something that I thought Republicans cared about, by $3 trillion that's put on the American family's credit card, that doesn't sound like a good trade.
I want to assure my right-wing listeners, it's an interview, not a debate. If I were debating the senator, I would debate that.
I get spirited about this, Hugh. You know, I get animated about it.
I know, but I just want people to know I'm not pushing back because it's an interview. Senator, this is a quasi-ambush question, but it's with a purpose. Do you know where the Office of Personnel Management is?
Where, like, the address of it?
Yeah.
No, I don't know the individual addresses.
Have you been inside of it?
I don't think it's an ambush question. I'm not sure that people expect that we know the addresses of these.
Have you been inside of OPM?
Of OPM? No, I do my business on the phone.
Okay. The reason I ask is because
generally when administration officials meet with members of Congress, they come to see us. I
think maybe you ought to go down to OPM. I ran it for 2.5 years as the general counsel, as the deputy director, and as the acting director. I know OPM. I think what DOJ is doing is great. I think the email from OPM was fine. I have no problem to skinnying down the government by at least 25%. What do you think?
I don't think that's what's going on. I mean, ultimately, I think that this is a thoughtless meat cleaver that is ultimately going to compromise the security of this country. I mean, you and I can have a conversation about soft power and USAID, but I think what they're doing at state and what they're doing at USAID is going to make this country less safe. You know, unilaterally deciding to fire everybody that has been onboarded in the last year or so has nothing to do with efficiency. That's just getting rid of everybody that showed up recently. Those hires in some of these departments might be the most critical hires. The folks that have been onboarded in the last few months at the FAA might be the most important people at the FAA. Or
they've only fired 143 people at the FAA. It's got 45,000 people.
It doesn't, whatever's happening at the FAA doesn't seem to be working right now because the planes are at risk of falling out of the sky.
No, actually, I am going to debate you there. 143 probationary employees out of 45,000 were laid off. None of them had anything to do with critical path safety. Senator Murphy could not stay, which is unfortunate. I do believe in courtesy, and I do believe in not arguing facts with guests from the other side of the aisle, like Senator Murphy or Senator Coons when he comes on, or Senator King, or Ro Khanna, or any of the Democrats who come here. I'm just very glad they come. I wish they would come more often. Every Democrat is always welcome here. And I do try and conduct interviews, not debates. And I had a moderate ambush question there. OPM is at 19 and E. It's got the best build. There's 6,000 people who work there. I worked there for 3 years. I think that they're well within their rights to ask everyone in the federal government what they've been doing for the past week so they can get a handle on it. And OPM sends out regular communications like the Federal Employee Health Benefits Manual every year, the Combined Federal Campaigns Manual, the Thrift Savings Plan, they communicate a lot. And the hysteria over the email is just kind of silly. And those agencies where it wasn't appropriate instructed their employees not to respond because it might be, I mean, if everyone just acted like adults. But I would like to clarify something for you. The House passed a framework last night to unlock reconciliation. So reconciliation is a fancy word for bills related to this budget can pass with 51 votes in the Senate. That means the House passes a bill out of the appropriate committee with jurisdiction, like Ways and Means, and then the Senate can pass the same bill with 51 votes, including the vote of the vice president if it's 50-50, and on down. And I did do my research, and the American Rescue Plan, which was unnecessary, we didn't need it, it ignited inflation, cost $2 trillion. And the Inflation Reduction Act, the sadly named Inflation Reduction Act, cost $1 trillion in red ink. It's going to cost between $2 trillion and $4 trillion. And Senator Murphy was saying, oh, no, we did offsets. Well, no, they didn't. The deficit went up last year by $1.7 trillion or something like that. I might be off by $2 trillion either way. But the deficit goes up. That means whatever you passed didn't reduce the deficit. So I could have argued the point with him, but he also avoided the assumptions of the House bill, which is they're not going to tax tips and they're not going to tax overtime. And I want Democrats to campaign on taxing tips and overtime because I don't think Americans want to tax tips or overtime. And I wanted to ask him about the OPM, and he'd never been there, and I'm not surprised. I think it would be good. You notice he said they come to us. That's actually not a good way to do oversight. Wander down there, go see the director, walk around the 6,000 people working there. Some of them don't work on site. See what you think. Some of them are working real hard. You go to the general counsel's office, those are the best lawyers in America. I had cause to deal with them last year. They are the best civil service lawyers in America because they deal with the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, which is a hideous law and complicated. And they have to deal with 1,000 different retirees, one of whom I know and got screwed, and I called them up and asked for help. And they helped because that employee got screwed. And there's a old saying in the government, if you've been the general counsel, you're still the general counsel everywhere that you've been the general counsel of. But we could have talked for a long time. I can save the government a lot of money. I would cut every state's federal money down to $7,500 a student unless and until, from the federal government, that they receive from the Department of Education, unless and until they gave at least $7,500 in a voucher to any student who wants one. That's why I love educationfreedomusa.com. That's the new project of Job Creators Network, a sponsor of my show. Educationfreedomusa.com is Job Creators Network of bringing everyone together under one tent who's working on school choice. Now, some states, and I don't know what the per student cost in California is. I believe it's greater than $20,000 a student. It does not deliver $20,000 worth of value. They got charter schools out here. They don't get $20,000 a student. They have to do much less. And they haven't got a lot of the bells and whistles that schools have, like a lot of administrators, like a lot of morning administrators, and then administrators for the administrators over at the school board. Instead, they have the same number of teachers roughly that they had when they had half as many students 25 years ago. And I'll tell you right now, we could save a lot of money with educationfreedomusa.com if we said to the states, you're losing all of your education money, or actually, I'd say half. You're losing half of your education money from the federal government unless you adopt a school choice program at least as robust as that just adopted by Tennessee. 20,000 vouchers. That's it. 20,000, or maybe on a per capita basis, ramp it up for California. Save 20,000 kids a year from awful public schools. Get in there and do the work. That's what Education Freedom USA is doing. Let me also tell you a little bit about my friends AndrewandTodd.com, and I want to do it back to back here. AndrewandTodd.com are going to save you money on your mortgage, even in an era when mortgages are really hard to come by. That's because AndrewandTodd.com work with Sierra Pacific Mortgage, my sponsor, and they have done my mortgage and Dwayne's mortgage and thousands of your mortgages, and they do it by underwriting the loan themselves. Sierra Pacific is the underwriter, they're the lender, so you're actually dealing with a bank when you call 888-888-1172. Whether you're a first-time home buyer and you're buying it from the FHA, they're doing the paper. If you're a veteran, you're not putting anything down, you're using a VA loan. You can have one at a time. You can leave a VA loan, go to another VA loan. AndrewandTodd.com can do it. If you're a senior citizen, you want to get money out of your house in order to make living a little bit easier, then the reverse mortgage, if you're 62 years and older and living in your primary residence, is available to you. It takes equity out of your house and it charges interest on it, but you don't have to make another mortgage payment. And if you live to be 120, you never have to make another mortgage payment. They lose money on the deal. But it's highly likely that they'll make some money, you'll get some money, and your heirs will get some money. That's the likeliest result. But don't eat soup out of a can and make it stretch for 3 days because you're out of money because of the Biden inflation. Call Andrew and Todd at 888-888-1172, 888-888-1172, and say, I need some help. I need some help, and you're going to help me, right? You're going to help me, and Andrew will. I've known him for 20-plus years, great Christian man. And Todd will. I've known him half as long, great Christian man. They'll spend as long as you need helping you with a mortgage and or a home equity line of credit or whatever it is you need. Maybe you just want to refinance now because you bought a construction loan to rebuild in the fires and now you want to take it out with a real loan. AndrewandTodd.com. Marco Rubio sat down with Brian Kilmeade of Fox. Cut number 7 from earlier today.
Senator Rubio called Vladimir Putin a thug. You still feel the same way?
But at the end of the day, what we feel about Vladimir Putin is irrelevant to achieving a peace here. What we're trying to do now is get people, we have to be grown-ups here. We're trying to get people to a negotiating table. You don't get people to a negotiating table like Vladimir Putin by calling them names, by being antagonistic. This is a costly war. It's cost billions of dollars for the United States, billions of dollars for Europe, 3 million Ukrainians no longer living in the country. So this is not a PR thing. This is not a political campaign. This is real world.
I like this approach, and I like the point that he made. If you're a senator, you have a different job than if you're Secretary of State. If you're a pundit and an analyst like me, I can say he's a war criminal, and he is a war criminal. He's a thug. He's an evil person, and God will not deal gently with Vladimir Putin unless he repents. But I don't know that he's a Christian. I don't know that he cares. All I know is he's a butcher. But that doesn't actually help stop the war. And so it doesn't matter what I say, and it doesn't matter what senators say. It matters what they do, and it matters what the Secretary of State says and what the National Security Advisors say. And I am interested in, is it possible to get to yes, to stop the killing with lines acceptable to Ukraine? And if it is, heck, I'll go paint his house if that makes it go forward. I think we ought to be realistic about this. Richard Nixon was Mr. Realist. I'm from the Nixon School of Foreign Affairs. When you're in the job, you talk differently than when you're a pundit. Cut number 8.
My reaction is NATO is not in jeopardy. The only thing that puts NATO in jeopardy is the fact that we have NATO allies who barely have militaries or whose militaries are not very capable because they've spent 40 years not spending any money on it. We've been NATO. And all President Trump has argued is what every president, every American president has argued for the last 30 years, and that is these are rich countries, especially in Western Europe. They have plenty of money. They should be investing that in their national security, and they're not. You have countries spending 1.5%, 1% of their economy, and we just can't keep subsidizing that. It's not fair, and it's not sustainable.
He thinks that the U.S. wants out of Europe, do your own thing. Is he misreading Donald Trump?
No, we're not saying do your own thing. We're saying do more. It's their continent, right? Why should we not be? Why is it unreasonable for the United States to ask rich European countries to invest more money in their own national security?
Well, I like what he said. We've been NATO. That's true. That hasn't always been true. Until the Soviet Union fell, NATO was NATO. The West Germans had a stake in it. The Fulda Gap is where the Soviet tanks were going to roll, and there were a bunch of West Germans there along with people like Mike Pompeo. We had a lot of troops in Europe, and we had a real enemy over there. But since the Soviet Union fell, we've been paying for their social welfare because we've been doing between 3 and 4% GDP, and they dropped down to 1.5%. And we're not going to do that anymore. And I think the message is received. One more cut of Marco Rubio with Brian Kilmeade. I think they're in the East Room because it's the biggest room I've ever seen. I don't think it's at the State Department. It must be the East Room in the White House, cut number 9.
All those countries you mentioned in Central America are all migratory routes. That is the route that people take to get to the southern border. So our border, in many cases, when it comes to mass migration, begins there. So we want countries to cooperate in stopping it. In addition, a number of these countries, I add Honduras now to the list, a number of these countries have now agreed not just to take back repatriation flights of their own nationals, but to take third country, meaning people from other countries who basically enter the United States illegally. We can send them to those countries, and they have a choice. They can go back to their home country or they can go to these countries. These are powerful tools, and that's why you're now seeing historically low numbers under President Trump.
Do you think
historically
it has a lot
low
to do
numbers
with
at the border?
your visits?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with President Trump. It has to do with the fact that people that were coming here realized that this isn't Joe Biden. Under President Trump, you're not just going to be able to come in, claim asylum, and stay forever. And so we are literally, in some of these countries, I had a call yesterday, one of these countries, they now have people doing U-turns, right? They were on their way here. They realized, okay, they're not playing around anymore. President Trump is serious, and they've done a U-turn. They're trying to go back to their country. Right. We're seeing that happen. And that is as a result of President Trump's very clear leadership on migration.
Now, I would encourage you all to head over to HughHewitt.com. I have posted the audio and transcript, or Dwayne did, of Tim Scott talking to me earlier today. He's working on the transcript and the audio of Chris Murphy, Senator Murphy, talking to me this hour. They're going to both be posted at HughHewitt.com. We'll push out the transcript to the media. We'll see if anyone picks up on that nonsense exchange about the FAA and planes falling out of the sky. I see Town Hall already did that. But it's all at YouTube as well. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. All right, just go and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and that way it'll pop up whenever I do an interview with a senator, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. It'll pop up, and with newsmakers as well. Want to make sure you're informed. If you follow my X account, formerly Twitter, now X, you're one of the 250,000 people that do. You'll note that earlier today, my old boss at the Post, David Shipley, whom I like a lot, came from Bloomberg. David Shipley had a disagreement with Jeff Bezos, the owner, and David decided to leave. I decided to leave the Post last year after I had a disagreement on air with one of their personalities, and I'm not here to revisit that. I just want you to know I offered to Jeff Bezos that I'll come in and take David's place. I'll be happy to return to the Post as the editor of Post Opinions. I think it would take me about 6 weeks to turn that into a dazzling opinion section that is fair and balanced and unafraid, to borrow Brett Baer's phrase, but it wouldn't be Fox News. It would, I can name, and I'm not going to name, I don't want to embarrass them, a half dozen people from the left, right, and center who are at least as equal to Ruth. Ruth, by the way, is a fabulous, Ruth Marcus, is a fabulous writer, reporter, journalist, and a friend of mine. And she'd be someone that I would keep. I would end all editorials. I would do all columns. I'd make the columns longer online. I would do what basically everybody's doing in media except the Post, which is podcast. If you can't podcast, you're not going to be a writer for me. And I would actually think we'd create revenue for the Post. There's no reason for the Washington Post to lose money. It's just that it's become an echo chamber of the Beltway, and the Beltway is classic countryside versus the capital revolution is underway in the United States, where the countryside is done with the capital. So it's pretty funny. I just posted it a few hours. This is my application, Jeff Bezos, to return to Post Opinions as its editor. Take about 6 weeks to make it interesting and dynamic again. And 76,000 people have viewed that, and 101 people have reposted it, and 72 people have commented, and 590 have liked it. It means the ratio is pretty good. And that was, I did that at 11:07 this morning, Pacific Coast time, so it's been 2.5 hours, so maybe that'll work. I do believe in doing what I've been doing today. If you talk to Tim Scott, you should talk to Chris Murphy, and then I'll talk to Dave McCormick about Pete Hegseth's 8% reprogramming and whether or not he thinks that will include the Columbia class. You know, it's pretty easy to be smart. If you're looking at the book over my shoulder here, 7 Things You Can't Say About China by Tom Cotton. I did a 7-part series with Senator Cotton about that book. It's a serious book. I'd find everyone who's doing a serious book in D.C., and I'd do a book excerpt because serious books in D.C. are few and far between. I noted that there's a new book coming out by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson about Joe Biden's infirmity. That's actually a book. Now, I think Jake and I think it's Alex are both fine reporters, but it's not like a scoop. In January of 2022, I did an editorial for every one of the stations that carry the Salem News Channel, thousands, that said Joe Biden's infirm. And it's not a scoop. Everybody in this country who was awake knew Joe Biden was infirm. Those who talked to him, and of course, he didn't spend as much time with me, 10 minutes, as Chris Murphy just did, because he wouldn't go in harm's way. He wouldn't even do the Super Bowl interview a year ago and a year and 2 weeks ago. Joe Biden was infirm. I mean, this is not exactly news. I don't know how you turn that into a scoop. Really, how do you turn that into a scoop? When everybody knows, it'd be like my telling you that Putin has invaded Ukraine. News at 11. It's not a scoop. Meanwhile, Trump the dictator, Scott Jennings, who is the Hugh Hewitt of CNN, said this last night, cut number 12.
Can we just address this dictator business? I'm going to quote from some statistics put together. So our old friend Chris Cillizza, who calculated that in the first month of the Trump administration, the president took 1,009 questions. Hardly dictatorial behavior. Same stat for Joe Biden, 141. And I would remind you all that in 2023, the Biden administration revoked the hard passes of 442 journalists. And at the time, the White House Correspondents Association took, quote, a non-committal stance. So if you're worried about transparency, Trump is being far more transparent than any recent administration.
Why were their press passes revoked?
I don't know.
Was it because they didn't go to the White House frequently? Because
I don't know. They lost their access.
That happens in every
They
administration.
lost their access.
So
442.
I'm joined now by Juan Ciscomani, Congressman extraordinaire on the Appropriations Committee. Hello, Congressman. How are you?
Hugh, always good to see you.
Good to see you. You're late, but I understand you were casting a vote. But
I ran as fast as I could without breathing too hard because I don't want to be out of breath here for your interview.
Congressman, not that I'm noticing, but you were on Guy Benson's show at 3 o'clock, just saying.
Yeah, I'm trying to fit it all in. You give me a break.
Just saying. Guy Benson, I brought him up in the business. If you're going to show up on someone's show and be late for the other one, it's kind of reverse there, Congressman.
Should we reverse it? I'll let him know you said that.
Well, he knows I say that. Give him a hard time. Congressman, you're going to come back for a second segment. Let me get one quick question in. The budget that passed last night. I was talking to Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut. I said, are you against not taxing tips? Are you against not taxing overtime? He said, that's not in that bill. I said, it's the assumption of the bill. Am I right?
All that is the assumption of it is. You're right. It's in there. I mean, the guidance of it, this is the blueprint of what we need to get to. It reflects the president's priorities and what we ran on as well. So it's a blueprint of this, but the fight starts now. This is what we got to fight for. And we got to communicate to the American people what's going to be on the reconciliation bill. The resolution was the blueprint of it. That's what got us into the field for the game. Now we got 4 quarters to go. So the fight starts now.
So I'm going to continue during the break and then bring you back. Quick exit question. Should the Senate just take this up, pass it, and then let's all get rolling on the budget blueprint we've got?
The Senate needs to act as quickly as possible and get on this.
All right. I'm going to come back during the break with Congressman Juan Ciscomani, who likes Guy Benson better than me, but who's counting. So I'm back with Congressman Juan Ciscomani. He's also going to be on after the break. We'll put it all on YouTube. Congressman, would you let me know the budget that passed last night? Is there any reason for the Senate not to pass it the way it is and then just get down to the business of the reconciliation bills?
No, I think, like I said, they need to act as quickly as possible on this. The Senate would have done something had we not done something. So it's important for the House to start these bills as our main jurisdiction says on that. So we want to make sure that we lead on this. What we passed out of the House is what could unite conservatives around and Republicans around this issue. It includes border security. It includes, like you mentioned, the extension of critical tax cuts, but also considering new ones like on tips and other things like this. The Democrats are going to be lying about this, right? They're saying it cuts
already
Medicaid.
are.
There's, it's all for the wealthy and the billionaires. Now they have Elon Musk as the face to be able to attack on every single corner. I was on the floor about to give some of the 5-minute speeches there, and every other speech from them, if not every speech, is all about Elon Musk. They're obsessed with this issue and this topic on him specifically. They see a face and they treat him as a punching bag. But listen, what the efforts of Doge and the efforts of actually going in and shaving off the excess of the federal government is something that politicians, Hugh, have been running on for generations. Okay, and no one has delivered on that. No one's taken it seriously. This is the time to do that while we protect vital programs as well. So I want to make that clear. I made that clear to the speaker leading up to the vote of my concerns, signed on to a letter publicly on it from the Hispanic Conference. And now, now their work starts.
Now, Congressman Chris Murphy said we're going to cut Medicaid. I don't think that's true. I think they're going to block grant Medicaid and maybe put some work requirements in it, but I don't think we're going to cut Medicaid. Minute to the break, and then we'll come back. What do you say?
Well, that's certainly not the plan. I mean, the president doesn't want to do that. He's been clear on that. We've been clear on this as well. We want to protect this vital service for those that need it the most. Work requirements is something that has broad support as well from the public also, and definitely here from legislators. These are all common sense things. It impacts states differently. I'm always considering how it impacts Arizona in my district specifically. I've been meeting with healthcare personnel and also community healthcare centers throughout today and yesterday on this, hearing from my constituents. I know where we're at, and I'm going to be fighting for this program to stay alive. Listen, if we don't do something on this, the solvency of this program will be gone, and no one will get benefits.
I'll be right back, Congressman. Stand by. We got 5 more minutes right after this.
The Hugh Hewitt Show returns in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. Congressman Juan Ciscomani is back with me. He's a member of the House Appropriations Committee, great congressman from Tucson. Congressman, in the blueprint that you passed last night, what does defense get or not get?
So the goal for defense is $100 billion, and that's all also packaged with. We've got extra of that for Homeland Security from the judiciary jurisdiction as well. But on the defense specifically, we're looking at about $100 billion in that.
Now, is that subject to revision up in the process? Because I don't think that's enough.
Yes, absolutely. So everything is up for revision. That's the point of this. Some people are only focusing on the guidance for example, energy and commerce of $880 billion. That's up for obviously consideration and revision, and how we're even going to be able to get there. Same for defense and everything else. Again, this is a blueprint of where we need to go. And the president approved it, liked it, endorsed it, and so did everyone in our conference -1. But this is as unified as we're going to be at this point. Sure. So we'll take the win and move on to the next step.
So you're an appropriator, most important committee in Congress. When do you guys raise the debt limit?
Well, this is one of the top priorities for the president. He's made that very clear. And Hugh, one thing that hasn't been discussed along all the way to this point, because the budget resolution has taken all the attention, is the pending expiration of the CR that we have on March 14th. That's something that should be everyone's focus at this point now. I know that the Appropriations Committee is fully on this. The projection of maybe having to do a year-long CR will be something that it's not my preference at all. That's not what we need. We can't be operating a whole year under last year's budget. Again, it's basically a Biden signed in law budget. to give the president that in his first year. We can't be wasting time like this. So we did all this work at the Appropriations Committee last summer, all the way into the fall. Unfortunately, we've had 2 CRs already. I just doing another one just seems that's not where we need to be going. Let's talk about defense. We don't meet the defense needs if we do that.
So, do we expect a package of a CR of some sort and a debt limit hike for the rest of the president's term?
Well, we're going to see if the CR is considered for the rest of the year. We're going to see what's in there. I think defense needs to be boosted in there. We'll probably have to do some kind of special package on Homeland Security as well. This is what needs to get off the ground for all the efforts that Tom Homan is doing, and also Kristi Noem. So those costs are going up, obviously, and we need to figure that out. So there's quite a bit to figure out within the Appropriations Committee from now until March 14th. And not enough talking about this has been happening. It's all been about the budget resolution, which I get it. That was a priority. But my gosh, it just feels like we're so late in the game on this, and we have to get on it, work overtime on this.
So, Congressman Juan Ciscomani, always a pleasure to talk to you from Tucson. Keep coming back. And say hello to Guy Benson for me when you see him next time. Yeah, okay. Congressman, always good to see you. Be well. Joined by Victor Davis Hansen, classicist, historian, longtime friend. Victor, good to see you again. I want to check in with you monthly through Trump 2.0 just to find out how you think it's going. Let's start with a general question. After almost 5 weeks, how do you assess the president's start?
I'd say I'd give him about a 90% success. It's sort of like the first 100 days of the FDR New Deal on reverse. And I give him a lot of credit because when we had the Wilsonian progressive change and we had the New Deal and we had the Great Society, every Republican who came in after said they were going to reverse it, and none did. He's the first that tried to actually do it, and he's made a good start. There's a little miscommunication sometimes when you have so many people doing so many things at so many levels. There's a little bit of unitary problem, but that's the only other thing I would suggest you is I wish they'd have a little bit more tragic flavor just because of the politics of it. When you're getting rid of this many people, you don't want to have a triumphalism. Once in a while, somebody will say, "We got." You want to say, "I didn't run up the 35 trillion. I don't like laying people off, but I don't like taking taxpayers' money and then having to borrow money to pay for people. But it gives me no pleasure." I didn't open the border. It's harder to close a border than to open. It's harder. I don't like deporting people, but I didn't let them in. That kind of attitude that you're the person who has the reluctant and unfortunate task of cleaning up the mess, not creating it. That would help, I think, on the communication.
That's Lincoln's more in sorrow than in anger tone. Yes. And I would welcome that as well. Victor, it's a funny place for me to start, but it's top of mind today. The White House press corps is in semi-revolt because new media is like Rush and me and talk radio, your new media. And then there's new media, which is like the Ruthless podcast and Megyn Kelly and people like that and the Daily Signal and people like that. But they added new people to the White House press room, like John Ashbrook of Ruthless. And then they announced they're going to control who's on the press pool. And you would think Rose Pierre had showed up with a guillotine. The White House press corps is melting down. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's almost a revelation that they were never really disinterested. If you were to poll the members of the White House press corps correspondents, I think you would see they lean ideologically very hard to the left. I think usually the president of that bunch works for somewhere like the New York Times or Politico. So it was a slanted group of people. It was not disinterested. And then it was kind of ossified too. I mean, we're in an age where certain podcasters have larger audiences than the New York Times, or much less the Chicago Tribune or the Los Angeles Times. And then we look at NPR and PBS and, the network news. It was all one-sided. And that's what I think their anger. I don't think they're serious about the principle. They're angry they lost their monopoly over the dissemination of what comes out of the White House.
Well, Eugene Daniels, and you were right, Eugene Daniels is presently the president of the White House Correspondents Association, though he is announced he's leaving Politico and he is going over to join MSNBC as a weekend host. He said yesterday that the White House's move represents the government will choose the journalists who cover the president. In a free country, leaders must not be able to choose their own press corps. Since its founding in 1914, the White House Correspondents Association has sought to ensure that the reporters, photographers, producers, and technicians who actually do the work 365 days of every year decide amongst themselves how these rotations operated so as to ensure consistent professional standards and fairness and access on behalf of all readers, viewers, and listeners. Do you think that's true?
No, people have, in this age, as I said, there's people who have much larger audiences and can reach more people that are not operating within that small room at the White House. And they don't seem to be complaining that they're shut out. The other thing to remember is that with Donald Trump, he's a force multiplier. He's had so many interviews, so many impromptu stops. Everywhere he walks, somebody shoves something in his face and he will give you a complete answer. In contrast, none of these people complained about Joe Biden when he avoided the press. He did not hold press conferences. He did not, he insulted people actually sometimes. So they're getting more access just in terms of volume and time from Donald Trump in so many different locations and venues than they ever got with Joe Biden. Yet I never heard them complain really about Joe Biden. A few of them did, but not many.
Now, there's a new book announced today. I've long worked with, and like Jake Tapper, I don't know Alex Thompson. They're coming out with a book called Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again. I want to get your reaction before I ask you a specific. Again, the title is Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again.
Well, like a lot of people who comment on the news, I remember writing in 2020 that he was something like a waxen effigy, and I got really attacked as ageist. Even I was on a news show, and they attacked me for that. I remember an infamous Jake Tapper interview with Laura Trump where she said that he was halting in speech, and she was accused of saying that she was, I guess, prejudicial or insensitive to people who had stutters, and that wasn't her point at all, that it sounded like a stutter. She was trying to be polite, actually. She probably wanted to say it was incomprehensible. But Jake Tapper and a lot of these people were part of that, I don't want to use the word conspiracy, but that effort to give a false sort of Edith Wilson cover-up of somebody who was non-compos mentis many times. So I don't know to what degree they're going to have credibility. It's almost like saying, well, we were part of one of the greatest cover-ups since the Wilson era, and we got caught. We didn't volunteer until we got caught, and now we're going to tell you how bad it was. But so I haven't read the book, but I don't know what their mea culpa will be. If it's going to be mea maxima culpa, and we were part of this, or it's just going to be just don't remember what we used to say.
I'm glad you brought that. I did a quick review. Thanks to Dwayne, I started calling Joe Biden infirm at least in January of 2022. So you beat me by at least a year. But it's not like this is a breaking news story or that it's other than an attempt by some people in the Beltway to say they're surprised. And maybe they are. I don't know what people know. But I'm not surprised that he showed up at that debate and couldn't put two words together, because he's infirm and has been infirm quite publicly for at least, in my view, 3 years, and you noted it 4 years ago.
Well, it was on the debate stage, if you remember, in the 2020 primaries where Joe Biden sort of mumbled something and he was confused, and Cory Booker, of all people, who was then a primary rival, said, I don't know what he's talking about. Did anybody understand what he said? And that was a theme during that. And then that Joe Biden's primary rivals were then recirculating that quote from Barack Obama. I guess it was authentic, where he said, Joe, you don't need to do this. And the thrust of that quote is, you're not able to do this and don't feel obligated on our part to do this. In fact, he lost, as you know, he lost 3 of the first 3 caucuses or primaries. And then under a very strange set of circumstances, he was kind of anointed as the only plausible moderate left in that field. And Jim Clyburn and people along with him guaranteed him a win in South Carolina and Nevada. And then almost like dominoes over the next 30 days, Klobuchar and Cory Booker and Bernie Sanders and they all Buttigieg, they all quietly dropped out. And then the idea was that he's the most viable old Joe. He was reinvented as old Joe from Scranton. And then we didn't really see him because he ran the campaign from the basement under the guise of COVID. It was a very mysterious thing. It was almost the bookend to how he was removed as a nominee. He was removed as a nominee by backroom interest in the same way as he was anointed the nominee.
All right, now, question going into our first break. Yesterday, Kerry Pickett, Washington Times reporter, posted, "Scoop, FBI looking into James Comey's off-the-books, quote, honeypot operation targeting 2016 Trump campaign," to which I responded, if, very big if, this is true or even truth adjacent, the scandal should shake everybody of standing in the mainstream in either party and any reporting or the passing understanding of American history. Do you think I'm right about that, if they ran a honeypot campaign against Donald Trump?
Absolutely, because that would be juxtaposed with all of the protestations the last 4 years. And in his memoir that he was a victim of Donald Trump's excesses and he was sort of the knight in shining armor. But we go back, he was called to testify in front of the House Intelligence Committee. As I remember, it was recorded 245 times he pled amnesia. Yep. And then he said he said to Donald Trump, "You're not an object of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation." Then he went out and recorded that on a device and leaked it to the New York Times.
Victor, I've never used the term deep state. I've always said administrative state, because the deep state is what existed during the Soviet Union or East Germany, Stasi, or Turkish police when they or Argentine junta, where people are disappeared. But my gosh, I'm beginning to reassess. Where are you on that question?
Well, I'm a little bit more cynical, because when I look at the last 4 FBI directors, Robert Mueller testified under oath that the 2 catalysts for his appointment, the Fusion GPS group and the Steele dossier, he didn't know what they were. He wanted us to believe that. And then the next FBI director, as I said, pled amnesia 245 times. The third one in succession, although he was an interim, Andrew McCabe, admittedly lied 4 times to federal investigators. That's in Michael Horowitz's report, and was not prosecuted. Then Christopher Wray, for some reason, just couldn't tell us, yes or no, for months, whether there were FBI informants on the Capitol, and other questions about traditional Catholics being surveilled, parents at school boards being surveilled, asymmetrical treatment toward anti-abortion. So I don't think the last 4 directors have had a very good reputation for veracity.
So are you neutral, in favor, or opposed to Kash Patel and Dan Bongino?
I'm for them. I've known Kash Patel because I'm a neighbor of Devin Nunes. So during that period in which he was a kind of a lone voice saying that he was the first one, remember, that said that, and he was damned for that, if I could use that expression, for saying that not only was Christopher Steele giving information to the FBI, but he was a paid informant, and nobody believed that. And then he said that Hillary Clinton was the ultimate employer of Christopher Steele through the Fusion GPS, Perkins Coie, and DNC paywalls, and everybody damned him for that. Adam Schiff really went after, but everything he said turned out to be true. I know that he's a controversial figure. Sometimes he said things that might be excessive, but I think at this point, when you have a cancer of this nature, you need chemotherapy, and I think that he'll bring it. And Dan Bongino, I've known, and Dan Bongino's very quick on his feet. He's very smart, and it's kind of ironic because they were saying about Kash Patel, we want somebody who's actually been on the street. We want a law enforcement. You haven't done that. You've been more in security or intelligence. And here we get a guy who was New York PD and Secret Service, and now all of a sudden that he's not intellectual enough for them. So I don't take these criticisms very seriously.
Longtime friend of the program, classicist military historian who for 25 years has represented seriousness of commentary. He is not easily given to exaggeration, a man of great learning and of extraordinary breadth of accomplishment. VDH, Vice President Vance, I was on special report on Friday night last, and I was asked to name winner of the week. I said, well, it's got to be Vice President Vance. He gave a speech on AI in Europe, gave a speech to the Munich conference where he brought up the First Amendment and what the West stands for. Then he came back to CPAC, handled every question with aplomb. Then he got into a debate with your friend and a guest of this show, Neil Ferguson, no mean historian. I think JD won. So we're dealing with an unusual, an explosion of new and smart talent on the stage. What do you make of this?
No, I agree entirely. It reminds me of sort of Patton's dash from Normandy to the Rhine, that Donald Trump is the armor and the disruptor and causes people to be shocked, and then he's the infantry that solidifies and follows up the advance. And that's what he does, because he's a master at repartee and explication. He comes in there and he's fearless, and he usually can out-debate or out-argue most of the people, surely the people in the media and surely the ministers in Europe. And the other thing very quickly is that he's got truth on his side, is that we've got 50,000 troops in Germany alone, 40 bases. They're running a $90 billion surplus with us. They have a 1.4 fertility rate. Their electricity cost is 4 times ours. They're not in a position to tell anybody, especially given our history with Germany, not just 2 wars, but shielding them in the Cold War and providing their expense. And another thing very quickly is the 9 derelict NATO nations that have not met after 11 years their 2% investment in defense, they look toward Germany. And when Germany didn't do it, and I don't think it has yet, it's about 1.6%, then they don't do it. If Merz were to say tomorrow we're going to meet the 2%, all the rest of the NATO nations would follow. So they have a lot of culpability and I think that JD knows that, and he's not going to take any guff from them.
Well, I agree. And Secretary of State Vance today said, we, the United States, we are NATO. We're paying the bills. So it's not like they can criticize us. I want to talk about the Democrats, Victor Davis Hansen. Earlier today on the program, Senator Murphy of Connecticut came on for 10 minutes. I credit him with coming on. It's an interview, not a debate. But at the end, he dropped this exchange in. Can we play the exchange with Senator Murphy?
Safe, unilaterally deciding to fire everybody that has been onboarded in the last year or so has nothing to do with efficiency. That's just getting rid of everybody that showed up recently. Those hires in some of these departments might be the most critical hires. The folks that have been onboarded in the last few months at the FAA might be the most important people at the FAA. Or
they've only fired 143 people at the FAA. It's got 45,000 people.
It doesn't, whatever's happening at the FAA doesn't seem to be working right now because the planes are at risk of falling out of the sky.
I corrected him. No, they're not. The 143 people that have been fired out of the 45,000 are not in critical positions. That Sean Duffy said that. What's wrong with the Democrats? They don't have an answer to anything.
No, their answer is that the problems that we left after 4 years have to be solved by Donald Trump within 30 days. And to the degree they're not, then it's his fault, even though they're existential and fundamental crisis. It wasn't Donald Trump that said that he was going to hire by superficial appearance in large part the FAA. It wasn't Donald Trump who was United Airlines and said 50% of all of our trainees are going to be non-white males. These were things that they did. And so it's very easy to run up money. It's very hard to pay down debt. It's very easy to open the border. It's very hard to close it. They know it. And it just shows you that if they were reflective and self-critical, they would say to themselves, we're 80-20, 70-30, 60-40 on all these issues, the border, crime, transgenderism, the New Green Deal. Let's try to go back to the 1996 Bill Clinton, the DNC. I went back and looked at it, It was pretty amazing. I think Mark Penn and Doug Schoen wrote the 96 convention. It was closed borders, legal-only immigration, tough on crime. My gosh, it said juveniles that commit felonies will be treated like adults. and it was balance the budget. And Bill Clinton, with help from Newt Gingrich, was the only president in a generation that and so there's a blueprint of the Democratic Party to victory, even though, Ross Perot helped them in those 2 elections, but they could still be viable, but they're not going to do that.
But Victor, they're afraid.
Down.
They're afraid of their fringe. They can't even speak up for Israel because after Israel's defeated Hezbollah, Assad stripped Iran of its air defenses and has Hamas 90% degraded, they're still afraid after the BBOS outrage to say a word about them. How do they get their courage back?
They are, but the irony, or maybe it's nemesis, is that these constituencies that they have been so terrified, for example, the Hispanic constituency on the border, they lost the election in part because 45% of Hispanics decided that they couldn't be trusted in the border, and their communities were the most impacted. They lost somewhere between 21 and 26% of black males. That was very determinative in the swing states, and that was because of issues like illegal migration, transgendered. So they don't even have sufficient antenna to see that when they demagogue these issues, they're losing their core base. And if you look at white males who turned out in 2020 and 2024, that alone would not explain why Donald Trump won the Electoral College and the popular vote. There was a large defection from youthful voters, Jewish voters, Asian voters, especially Hispanic and black males. And they don't understand that those issues that they think are sacrosanct are bleeding their own base.
Last question, Victor Davis Hansen. What does Trump, and to a lesser extent Vance, Cotton, Glenn Youngkin, and the bench, what do they have to do to keep the Trump coalition beyond the time he has to leave in 2029?
Well, I think they have to. I think they're going to have to make progress on the debt, and we'll see. It won't be enough just to reduce the $1.5 trillion annual deficit by $200 billion. They need something really earth-shattering. So I'm a little worried that they want to give back money. I think the MAGA base says, look, if you're going to go through all that criticism to cut spending, and we're going to have some tax cuts to spur GDP growth, let's not just go back and redistribute. Let's get the thing done. And that was the source of Bill Clinton's power when he did that. And he had a balanced budget for 3 years. And it's to his credit. And Donald Trump I can see that in 2 or 3 years he could do that. But I don't think, I was against cutting Social Security. I'm on Social Security. I don't really think, that's not a big thing to cut taxes on Social Security. I can see tips and things, but if you look at all the tax cuts he's promised over a decade, they're about $1.5 trillion. And I wish that we would put more emphasis on sobriety and get this budget deficit fixed.
Because it's not sustainable. 36 trillion on the way to 37 trillion, not sustainable. Victor Davis Hansen, I will talk to you in March. Thank you again. Our monthly update from the Central Valley on common sense and Donald Trump. That's the man who knows it. VDH. Follow him on X at VD Hansen. Sarah Bedford joins me with the Washington Examiner. Sarah, what's going to happen to the House budget that passed last night by 1 vote?
It has a really long road ahead at this point because Senate Republicans, they aren't interested in haggling over the tax cuts in the House version of the bill right now. The Senate version that passed a week earlier is different. It's leaner. Senate Republicans think that they can get it through faster than the House version. So there's a lot of haggling out the differences between the two chambers that has to happen on the road ahead.
I had on Senator Scott today, and there are only 2 Republicans who are in danger of losing their seats. That's Senator Collins and Senator Tillis. And I think they're going to be in fine shape if they get a budget passed and the tax cuts extended. I think they're in trouble if that doesn't happen. Why in the world would the Republicans not pass this? But I mean, there's a lot of wiggle room in this budget about what to do. But if you do the envelope, you can work within the envelope. Why would they not do that yesterday?
Well, I think there's a fear that because there's this cap on how much the tax cuts can cost in the bill, right? They can't cost more than $4.5 trillion over 10 years. There's a fear that you cannot make the math work to make permanent the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 and also accomplish everything else on Trump's wish list when it comes to taxes, like no taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime, no taxes on Social Security. Those all have to fit within that top line number too. And so I think that you're looking at some sort of time limit on the TCJA to accomplish everything there. And so the Senate doesn't want to drop the ball on either any of those promises that Trump has made the American people. They don't want to deal with it right now.
But they have to deal with it by the end of the year. The longer, and I'll ask Dave McCormick this right after the break. I just want to know what you're hearing. If they wait until the end of the year to deal with the taxes, that makes it harder to do, less likely to pass, and whatever impact it has on growth is postponed.
Well, that is certainly the House argument, right? Also that this is the only train leaving the station, right? So you might as well put this very important piece of cargo on it or else risk it never making it out of the gate towards the end of the year when you don't know what the political landscape is going to look like. Republicans, they have the wind at their back right now. It is an ideal moment in some Republicans' view to move ahead on this right now. The Senate rationale would be that the government funding is going to run out. DHS needs funding right now for the border security, for the deportations that Donald Trump wants to undertake. And if you spend a couple of months haggling over the tax piece of this, you might not accomplish that border spending appropriations that the Trump administration really needs right now.
Now, Sarah, they can do both. I mean, you can hold two thoughts at one time. You can walk and chew gum. If they pass the budget, it doesn't commit anybody to anything. It just gives a big win to Donald Trump. I genuinely don't know the argument for not doing that. Do you?
Well, I just think that the Senate Republicans want to take the simplest road from point A to point B. That's just their defense and border spending bill. They don't have to deal with, for example, what happens to Medicaid. Is that going to get cut? The House version of the bill deals with some healthcare spending that's just not in the Senate version. So there are thorny questions that don't have to get answered if you just go with the Senate's version. But I think Donald Trump has done a pretty good job.
You don't have to deal with them either if you pass the budget. You just have the field contours are set. The contours are a deficit of $2.5 trillion and $2 trillion in spending cuts from wherever you can find. That's it. That's the blueprint. Why wouldn't they say yes?
After the budget resolution, because I think that they don't want to color inside the lines that are outlined by this House version. They don't want to have to deal with this stuff, and they won't have to for potentially months and months if they just go with the Senate version. And so because of that, I think you are seeing some resistance to going the House route, which tries to accomplish quite a lot and will potentially get into some.
I knew there was resistance before, but who is the resistance now? Because the House did what they said they couldn't do. The Senate said they couldn't do it. They did it. Who's put their hand up and say no? Who's done that?
You have Senate leadership already expressing skepticism about the House version. You have Barrasso. You even have Senate Majority Leader John Thune coming out and saying, wait. We need to take a look at this. Some of this is going to need to get stripped out. You know, we need to change this. The problem is that the math is so narrow in the House that if you start tinkering with it to make Senate leadership happy, I mean, it just barely got through the House by the skin of Mike Johnson's teeth. If you start changing it, you're going to lose those fiscal hawks that just barely got on board.
Yeah, they're one vote away from losing the House. I really do not know how they get out of a box canyon without just voting yes and then getting down to work in the committees. Sarah Bedford, we'll be following you at Sarah C. Bedford on X. We'll see if this time next week they haven't come around to my point of view, and I was neutral going in, but the House got done what they said they couldn't get done, so I'll just go along and do it. Dave McCormick is Senator David McCormick from the great state of Pennsylvania. Hello, Senator. How are you?
I'm great, Hugh. Good to be with you.
I'm not going to have my feelings hurt. You sat down with Selena Zito. I think she must have cooked the 7 fishes for you, and you don't show up on video with me. I won't feel bad about that, though, Senator.
Sorry about that. They have me running all over the place here voting.
I know. Voting is something in it. Senator, you haven't been there long, but I wonder if you have an idea of what's going to happen with the House budget, because just from my corner of the world, I'm in California today, looks like a no nonsense, pass the House budget and get down to work in the committees. What's going to happen?
Well, listen, I think I was pleasantly surprised that the House came back with what it did yesterday. The president's priorities are really clear. He wants to close the border. He wants to make sure we have peace through strength. He wants to unlock energy, and he wants to pull back on this excessive, out of control spending that we have. And the House bill was a great start, and it made really good progress. It did not make his tax cuts permanent, which will be something that the president said he wanted to do. So that's an important issue. And there's a lot of cost reduction we need to do to be able to pay for all the things in reconciliation that President Trump has said he would do and that America needs. So now the work begins, but that was a good start.
Has the Senate passed a budget, Senator McCormick?
No,
okay.
They have not yet. Yeah, they passed a budget resolution, which is now there's an effort within the various appropriations committees to meet budgetary targets, but they haven't put forward a budget yet.
Does the Senate budget have to come up with more cuts than the House budget in order to have a conference on the budget resolution that would allow for more cuts?
Well, the Senate will have to decide at this point how it's going to respond to the House bill, and whether it's going to start with the House bill or whether it's going to move forward on its own bill, mark up and amend the House bill or work on the Senate bill. And, the big difference is going to be how the tax cuts are treated, because that has a lot to do with what the cost reductions need to be. But the good news is, and I've talked to Speaker Johnson about this, and I obviously heard the president speak about this, and Majority Leader Thune. Everybody agrees on what the key priorities are, and this is hard work, so we got to get to work and do it. But I think there's a real commitment to doing it. I'm not one who's going to tell you what the right process is, because I'm new to this, but the results that we need are clear, and that's what we're focused on.
So, Senator, you're new, but a couple of old-timers and good friends of the program, Senator Collins, who's my de facto senator, right? I spent so much time in Maine, and Senator Tillis, who's a good friend and was a friend of all the Afghans and the veterans. They're good people. The only way they lose re-election, the only way the Republicans lose the majority is to screw up the budget. It's the only way you guys could screw this up. Why not just pass the House budget and go from there?
Well, the key question is whether we make the tax cuts permanent. And then there's a lot of other things that the president talked about on the campaign trail, eliminating taxes on tips, eliminating tax on overtime. So there's a number of other things that we have to decide how to move forward on. So, listen, the House bill was a great start, and I think it gives the Senate something to work with. But the question will be how we wrestle with those things that the House bill didn't address that the president's promised and that we've all committed to do.
But now, Senator Thune told me, the leader told me, I'd rather have two bills than one, two reconciliations. Okay, so you do the House bill number one, and then the Senate does a second reconciliation, and you catch up with everything that needs to be done.
That's right.
Isn't that the way to go?
That very, very possibly could be the way we go. That very possibly could be the way we do. Get this first bill done, and then move on to a second reconciliation. Reconciliation, as you know, it gives us a historic opportunity. In the last 100 years, there's only been 4 occasions where Republicans had the House, the Senate, and the White House, and in each case we only had it for 2 years. And so it makes it all the more important to deliver on the promises, because it's a unique moment to be able to do that through the reconciliation process, and that's why we got to keep moving.
You're an old wrestler, Senator. When you had 3 rounds, right, in high school wrestling?
Yes, 3 periods. That's right.
Wouldn't you rather win the first 2 and then not play the third?
Well, you like to pin him in the second, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I'm just a lawyer out in California. I'm not in the halls of Congress. This does not seem complicated to me. Don't name any name. Has anyone got a better idea that's come up to you and said, nah, we don't want to do that, Dave?
Then passing the House bill?
Right.
Well, there was certainly a Senate option that was being developed as we speak. And so the key question will be the reconciliation of those 2 things. And obviously you have to have a majority of 1 vote in both houses to be able to move forward in reconciliation, and that's the balancing act that we're going to work our way through right now.
So you pin him in the first round with the budget from the House, and you pin him in the
you mentioned here.
Yeah, well, you pin him in the first round with the House budget. You pin him in the second round with whatever doesn't get done, and we've won. I mean, Donald Trump gets the midterms, and Ossoff loses, Collins and Tillis wins. This ain't complicated.
Well, the thing I think you're right about that's not complicated is we got to deliver on the promises. So that is indisputable. I think everybody recognizes the seriousness of doing so, and we've been working hard to get the president's nominees in place, and are now turning to this. And I think you'll see a lot of movement over the next few weeks, hopefully in the direction of a good, strong resolution.
Okay, quick question, which I did not like about the House budget bill. It's only $100 billion for defense. I assume you got to come back in round 2 and do more for defense. Is $100 billion enough in the plus up?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we, when President Trump talks about peace through strength, I think we have a very dangerous world, probably the most dangerous it's been since the end of World War II. We've got not only the challenge of an adversary, a hostile adversary in China, but we also have what's going on with Iran and North Korea, and of course Russia, who's also an aggressor. So I think we're going to need more. We need to rebuild our Navy, hopefully in the Philadelphia shipyard in Pennsylvania, and so I think we're going to need more in defense.
I agree with you. I hope you get that done. Senator Dave McCormick, good to talk to you. Senator, keep coming back. Next time on video. Selena didn't get all the video stuff. I'm telling you, I'm a little jealous. Thank you. I want to finish today's show by saying I'm very glad the House passed a budget resolution. A lot of people didn't think Speaker Johnson could pull that off. The budget resolution, if a budget resolution is adopted, the same budget resolution is adopted by both the House and the Senate, unlocks the reconciliation process. And every bill that is germane to the budget on taxing and spending then goes through the reconciliation process and is outside of the filibuster rules. So it's the big key to unlock a lot of legislation. And it's a $4.5 trillion budget with a $2.5 trillion deficit that will allow extension of the Trump tax cuts and a lot of other stuff. So the Senate didn't think the House could pass a budget, so they began to work on a budget resolution of only $2 trillion in spending and leave the tax code to later. Well, the House passed it. So now, to me, just a lawyer on the radio and television, just a commentator, not a legislator, friends on every corner that's a Republican and sometimes Democrat, thinks the easy thing to do is to pass the House budget and get to work on the bills that go through reconciliation. Some of them are tax bills, some of the defense bills, energy bills, border bills, all sorts of bills. Because the budget agreement doesn't mean anything other than you get to do the bills that implement the budget agreement with 51 votes, including the vote of the vice president if necessary. That, to me, is about the easiest decision I've ever heard of. I have no idea why the Republicans in the Senate haven't already passed it, except maybe they didn't expect it to happen today. But by the weekend, they ought to get together and say, no, that's good. We're good. We're going to vote that next week. That's the budget. Let the reconciliation games begin and get to it. And if they miss this opportunity, never miss an opportunity to miss the opportunity. That's not what the Republicans want to be known for. The opportunity is there. Well done, Speaker Mike Johnson and the House Republicans. Let's get to work, Senate Republicans.